Good evening. Welcome to the Kenmore-Tonawanda Union Free School District Budget Work Session for March 2nd, 2021. District Clerk, please note that all trustees are present. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hey, our board and district vision is to create a community of dynamic learners who possess social awareness, confidence, and a belief in their power to succeed. Our Kenton School community mission is to provide students with support, tools, and diverse opportunities to meet the challenges of an ever-changing world. And our values are respect, independence, trust, teamwork, integrity, excellence, and responsibility. And moving on to item 2 on the agenda, it's our approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve? So moved by Leslie. Second by Andrew. Any discussion? Okay, there being none, I call for a vote. All those in favor so signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carried unanimously. Item 3 is our budget development update.
Just to update you on where we're going, we have another budget work session we're still as we're developing the budget, and then we are asking you to approve and adopt the budget in the April meeting, and we have a budget hearing, and then finally the budget vote on May 18th. So as of right now, we're looking at a $2.2 million budget gap, and as we develop, we know we're going to refine and try to obviously close that gap. So far, we've refined a lot of our BOCES service requests, but we're still reviewing some. We've reviewed our retirements. Assistant Superintendent Richards will be reviewing staffing with you at the next board meeting. And we're still refining our health insurance budget as it stands. So, from our initial rollover budget, which was $174 million, we added and subtracted from various places, but the main areas I wanted to discuss are we've added in our tech replacement plan, so all of the technology that we have, replacing that over the next 10 years. Also, specifically doing like certain technology upgrades in the buildings in terms of flat panels or however we move with that, but just adding technology into our budget, just being very cautious and aware that it's there and it needs to be updated. And putting a plan together to upgrade the entire district for the next 10 years, really. So we added that $450,000 in there. We had 15 retirements as of last week when I put this together. I know we're still taking those and reviewing those numbers to refine them. TRS, the Teachers Retirement System, I had that budgeted a little higher than it should have been. I moved that down to what they really think the estimate's going to be, which is 9.8%. And we reduced in other various areas and added in other areas. The total draft budget for right now is $172,742,565 for expenditures. We had one change from the rollover budget for revenue. We finalized the tax cap. BOCES was able to give us their final number. The difference there is the expenditures for their capital projects. So we get to take those into account when we're looking at our tax cap and exclude those expenditures above and beyond what they receive and aid us on for their capital expenditures. And they're doing some work there at Erie 1. So our final tax levy limit is 1.97%, or a year-over-year increase of $2.5 million for our capital levy. That's what it increased to from the last preliminary calculation. So again, our 2021 tax levy was $88,262,900, and we are with this final tax cap, we are allowed to have a tax levy limit of $89,998,791. So I wanted to do a very preliminary tax rate for you all to see what that would look like. And we did some work around this as we discussed. So our 2021 tax levy increase was 2.59%. We're potentially proposing in this budget a 1.97% increase. Our current tax rate is $53.15 with a bunch of other decimal points on it, but I just wanted to keep it simple here. And if you increase that 1.97%, it looks like the tax rate will be around $54.20. Now, that assumes that everything else is the same. There's no increase in assessments or decrease in assessments, and that the equalization rate stays the same as it was last year. But those are two factors that we know we don't have any control over. So again, this is just an estimate for the purposes of review. Those can change up and until July of 2021. So, and then the final assessments come out in August, and the final equalization rates come out somewhere between May and July. So on average, our tax rate increase has been about 3.02% since 2004-05. So we would be proposing a 1.97% increase to the tax levy and rate. One other thing I want to discuss is our bus purchase plan. We're continuing our rotation of buses and looking at our 10-year replacement cycle, and we'd be looking at buying 10 buses this year. As you can see the detail there, with a total cost of a little over $1 million, which is 70% aided by the state of New York, assuming that they don't roll up those expenditure-based aids into that building, that services aid block grant that the governor proposed in his initial executive budget. So the true cost to the district is about $301,000 on those buses. And those will be a separate proposition to the budget for the vote. So just to reiterate, over the last 14 years, we've been underfunded about $156 million with the foundation aid history that we have, the foundation aid formula not being fully implemented. I know we discussed this last time, but just looking at that and what that means to us and the current economic conditions of the state of New York and what that money would mean to us at this time. And just to look back at what our foundation aid and state aid in total has been over the years. So what does that all mean? Well, we currently have a $2.2 million budget gap. We're still looking to close that. And we still have those important questions. What's happening with state aid? We haven't had that answered yet. The state budget goes into effect April 1, so we're still waiting to hear numbers on that. There's a lot going on at the state level right now with the governor, so we're just preparing and waiting to hear what will happen with that. So as we discussed before, in our budget is $8 million in appropriated fund balance. And so what that would say is if we don't want to recognize any of our fund balance or reserves as revenue, we'd have to spend $8 million less than the $170.5 million in estimated revenues. So if you look, we're really trying to close a budget gap of $10.2 million, including that $8 million in revenue. So obviously our priorities are closing the budget gap. Assistant Superintendent Richards is going to be giving you a presentation on staffing, and we'll know more after that. We're currently monitoring and updating our fund balance projections. I want to get a final one for the board and the superintendent very soon. And state aid and legislative budget, we're still waiting on those. I haven't heard when they're thinking about passing one. I haven't even really heard a lot of advocacy from groups. I mean, I have heard some, but it hasn't been at the forefront, maybe because there's a lot of other things going on at the state level right now. But one thing I did want to discuss, just so you're all aware, so the stimulus deals that have been passed over the last year through COVID, so, and how they impact school districts. So the first was the CARES Act that was passed last year, and that affected the 2020-21 budget year. So the current year that we're in, that's the year that affected. That gave us that additional $1.8 million for this budget year to supplement the reduction in aid that the governor made. The second stimulus package is the COVID-19 supplemental stimulus package. That's the package that's affecting our upcoming budget year. So that's the 21-22 budget year. And there's the third that's not passed completely yet, that I believe they're calling the American Recovery Act. And you may have read about it in the newspaper. They're talking about a large sum of money for the district, but it's going to be over a number of years. So we aren't really sure what's going to happen with that yet, but we do know, and I'm hoping, that they're going to hold off on allocating that until the following fiscal year, which would be 22-23, because we know that it's going to take much longer for the finances of New York State to become good again. The economy is not just going to become good overnight. It's not going to bounce back. So I just wanted you guys to understand those were the three different packages. The first two have been passed, but again, the third one has not. So, and those really are to supplement, you know, the expenditures that we've had during this time. So I thought that was a good thing to mention for all of you. And I'm looking forward to, we have a call with the Assemblyman this Friday, so I'm looking forward to advocating on our behalf for additional state aid from him. Does anybody have any questions for me on this budget?
Mind if I have just a few.
Sure.
One dawned on me just tonight, and it is kind of related to what we talked about a bit at the retreat, and it concerns school bus funding. I read recently that a school district, I don't even think it was in New York State, is going toward electric school buses. And I mean, each bus is extremely expensive, and the initial outlay for the charging station or stations is very expensive too. But in the long run, from the article anyway, it said that they hope to realize significant savings. And so I was just wondering if our district has talked about that possibility. I know we're transitioning from diesel to gasoline right now, but is that in, you know, on the horizon, at least in our talks?
So it's not something we've explored as far as I'm aware, but it's definitely something we can explore. I know that there are large initial costs, and because of our number of buses, it would be very difficult to replace them and really would have to be over time.
Right.
And I don't have the information to share with you right now. I mean, I certainly can in the future, but to know what type of maintenance mechanic we would need for those as well, as we look forward in the future, would be one of the other items that I'd have to investigate for you. So I certainly could. It hasn't been brought up, but it's definitely a good idea.
Okay, thank you. Another question has to do with retirements, and I know that you mentioned that Assistant Superintendent Richards will be talking to us about staffing
Yep.
on next week at the regular board meeting or tonight?
At the regular board meeting,
Okay.
sorry.
Well, I was just wondering, just two things about retirements. You said that there are 15 in hand right now?
In this budget, so
Right.
they were ongoing through the week, and there are additional retirements that we've had.
Okay,
So
because the official deadline was...
That's not the final number. That one's based on 15.
Okay, and the deadline was yesterday?
Yeah, I believe
I
it was
think-
yesterday. Yep.
Do we extend the deadline in case teachers, change their mind, or staff members?
The contract as it reads calls for a March 1st deadline, but we always entertain specific and, particular concerns, or if there's a very case-specific situation, as we've done in the past since I've been here, we do entertain those post-deadline, but there really is a deadline in the contract.
Okay, thank you. Because I know that there's a bill before the legislature right now, as they sort out the state budget coming up, that would call for a vote on early retirement incentive for, state employees, including teachers under certain conditions of their employment, et cetera. And I was just wondering if that does come to pass, there might be a few additional teachers who would take that incentive offer.
Yeah, I would say we'd probably review those on a case-by-case basis, like you're saying. If there were additional ones, and that would be a savings to the district, we may be able to work something out with the KTA on that, the teachers union.
Okay, thanks. And the last question, thank you for clarifying the 3 different COVID relief bills at the federal level, the one that we have, the one that is in this next year, and the big one. And is the third one that is pending the one that the Buffalo News
Yes.
reported, the $12 million, due our
Yes.
district?
Yes,
Okay.
that is the one. I can't remember who posted that at this time, but I thought that would be nice for you all to know. Just because it hasn't been passed yet, and we don't even know that it has to pass through the state, and the governor has in the past taken some of that money and done, I don't know what with it, but he has taken that on our behalf. So those are the raw numbers, but what actually makes its way to us, I don't know what that will be. So it's important to understand those, as we move forward here, and understanding the implications of the next budgets as we move forward.
Right. And in relation to this budget and the federal infusion, which is for us, did you say
It's about 6.7 million.
6.7 million?
Yeah.
I think I asked this either at the last board meeting or at the retreat. Is that something that we could tease out and spend? Do we have that option to spend it over a couple of years instead of relying on that lump sum for just this budget and having it be, kind of deceptive? As, Rick Timms, I mentioned, and the Senate, State Senate Education Committee leader, Mayor, mentioned as well, that, we should be wary of that sum, just...
Well, so the tough part is they reduced what they gave us for state aid, and then they added that back as a supplement, really, to that 6.7 million. So can we tease it out and spend it year over year? Potentially, but that would mean we would have to reduce our expenses further to be able to do that, right? So we're hoping to know more. They haven't shed light on what that looks like or how many years we have. The CARES Act, we do have 3 years for, but again, they reduced our aid for the fiscal year and supplemented it with that CARES Act money. So it's hard for districts not to rely on that supplemented money, right? So we have a little bit more wherewithal now. We're in a little bit better of a place in terms of planning than we were last March. But as we move forward, I think we're currently planning on using that 6.7 in the next fiscal year if we receive it. But you're right, it's not next year that we have to worry about, it's future years, and it's that additional money. So I'm hoping that that will be slotted for future years' use. The larger sum, the $12 million sum that you saw in the Buffalo News. The windfall, as they called it, which I did not like at all.
Right.
Because it's not, it's not a windfall. A windfall would assume that we are going to, that's extra money that we're receiving, and it's not. So,
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thank you.
yeah.
I actually had a question about the reserve usage. So correct me if I'm wrong, but $8 million in reserve usage is kind of high compared to what we have done in the past? Or is
Not
that-
really.
Not really?
So over the last 5 years, you've had about 8 to 8.5 million in appropriated reserves and fund balance. So it's not high in comparison to what you've done in the past. I'd like to see that number come down slowly over time because you can't just eliminate it. Just
Nicole,
what it-
can you just emphasize, though, the difference between reserve and fund balance from year to year? Just kind of hit on that one more time, because there's a big difference on how it's been budgeted over the years and anticipated fund balance rollover. Can we just talk about that just a little
Sure.
bit more?
Sure. So when we build it into the budget, when we say we're anticipating using $8 million of our reserves, we're assuming that we're going to spend up to that limit. So we haven't been spending up to that limit. We've actually been putting money into our reserves year over year. That's what you wanted me to?
Well, and that's kind of what I was wondering, because I know that when we prepare a budget, there's some use of fund balance in the budget.
Right.
But then at the end of the year, we're putting some money back into the fund balance.
Right.
Every year that I've been on the board, I think, right? And that may mean that the fund balance is lower than it was when we started, because we may say we're going to spend 8 million, and then we roll 3 over to the next year, so it's like it's a net
So-
decrease of 5. I guess what I wanted to say is, when you prepare your projections, could you also give us sort of that picture too? Because when we see pictures of fund balance, we just always see graphs of net fund balance. And I don't think I've ever seen one that shows sort of like, we budgeted this much and then we put this much in, and we budgeted this much and we put this much in.
Sure.
We just see this year at the end of the year we had this much, and this much at the end of the year we had this much, and it might have been broken down between appropriated and unappropriated, and that might be a useful discussion to have too.
No, it's
for
a
newer
very-
board members, but.
It's a useful discussion to have, because as you're saying, so realistically, we budget for using $8 million year over year, but we don't use $8 million. We don't even use $1 million most years. So, because if we did, we would have depleted our entire fund balance and reserves over the last 5 years,
Right.
right? So, it's important to understand that, and like you're saying, so I appreciate the question, and I can certainly, in further analysis, show you the use of reserves. And when year end comes, that's when that surplus happens. So any of our revenue versus any of our expense, whatever we have, if we have more revenue, obviously, then we put whatever's left over into our reserves at year end. So we don't always take into account, like this year, the 8 million, we may only spend 160 million, and we may receive in 162 million, so we wouldn't have to recognize any of our reserves or fund balance. So,
But when we compute that amount that we roll into the fund balance at the end of the year, though, is that sort of based on like in this picture, we would have said, actually, are we saying we're going to put 8 million into the reserves or take 8 million out? Because
No.
I just realized that's on the revenue side.
yep, so as our revenue budget, we have $170.5 million in revenue budgeted. Of that, $8 million in that budget is appropriated fund balance and reserves.
Okay.
So if we don't want to use our fund balance and reserves, we have to spend less than $162 million.
Right. And then
We
if
wanna
we
keep
and
it
then
stable.
if we spend, so right here we have an expenditure budget of 172.
Yep.
And if we spend 165, then do the math really quick. Then do we
We-
roll 5 million into our fund balance at the end of the year, or how does that math work?
So So we would, if we spent 165, that's a great question. If we spent 165, we would recognize $3 or $4 million of appropriated reserves and fund balance so that we wouldn't have a deficit. So we want to match our revenue and expense, but it's very difficult to do, right, on a $170 million budget. So we build appropriated in there for that flexibility to spend if we need to spend.
Right, and so if we get that 6.2 million and we end up spending 170, then we're pretty
Correct.
straight even at that point.
Right.
Yep, okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. This is always the mental gymnastics that I always like. The whole concept of reserves and fund balance is always,
Well, and to Nicole's credit, in the short amount of time that she's been here, she wants to set up our structure moving forward, that it's a little bit more close, it's closer, it's more accurate to that balanced budget without that revenue fund balance carryover. Do you know,
right,
does that make sense?
yeah, I feel like we've been building this buffer into our budgets that we don't really need, apparently. And I understand the desire to have a percentage, like when you do project planning, you build a reserve into the project budget, right? And this is sort of the same concept, but I see what you're saying. Like
Right.
if we're consistently not using it,
Right,
then-
and so, not that there's anything wrong with doing that, because there isn't. It's just a way of making sure you have enough built in, because we're never allowed to spend more, right? We just can't spend more. We're not legally allowed to. So, but if you're trying to budget closer to what your revenue and expense really are, then you bring that down, and then when you need more funding, you go to the board and you put a request in. I had 4 special ed students move into the district, and I need $1 million on BOCES funds, and this is where what reserve I'm gonna pull it from, and this is where I'm gonna put it in the budget to increase revenue and expense. That's typically the way I've become familiar with doing the process of fund balance and reserves. Sort of, and then that holds everybody a little bit more accountable, right? In the ability to not just spend, so.
thank you.
Sure.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Oh.
Regarding, like you were talking about that windfall that would actually come to the state first, and then even though the Buffalo News said we're supposed to get this big windfall, the state really gets it. Is there anything stopping the state from doing kind of like what they did the past year, where they took some money away and then they just said, oh, hey, look it, you've got this federal money? Could they do that again?
So there is something that says there's a certain amount that has to be kept and spent with the school districts. But it's sort of convoluted. I mean, we're led to believe some things, but I don't have the exact details to what that is. I mean, that would be a great question to ask. So we sort of just get the money that they give us, and that's that. I forget what it's exactly called. It's called an MOE. So he has to provide documentation that supports how the money was all spent, which is why we have to file all of the forms through the state and what they were spending the money on for certain required expenditures as passed down through the federal government. So it's written in the legislation somewhere. Now, the documents are like 300 pages long, and you have to be an attorney almost to read them. So, not that we can't do that, but it is a good question, and I'm not sure exactly how we would figure that out or where we would go to do that. But probably the first start would be the assemblyman and see if he knows the answer to that for sure. So. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, can I just make a couple comments, closing comments on? So a couple takeaways that Nicole continues. First of all, Nicole's doing a fantastic job. She's really, people say to me all the time, you chose to come into a school district during a pandemic, and I respond with, well, our business official came in not only during a pandemic, but after the year had already begun. So for coming in November, and it's like she's been here all along. So she's really doing a wonderful job. The supplement that she emphasized is very important for our public to understand, because a lot of times we see dollar figures in the news, 6.7, 1.2, 12.3, whatever the case may be. And when people start to understand that it is in lieu of, oftentimes, state aid is reduced and then that money comes in, very quickly, do we understand that during this pandemic, we really haven't seen that windfall, I guess, that so often is referred to. So just to reemphasize that point. The other thing, just on Board Member Riegstad's comment about the buses, I like the idea. What I would also be concerned with, just to give you a heads up, Dr. Riegstad, that we'll have to look at, Nicole touched on it, what the implication is for how we maintain. So not just the purchase, but then how we maintain with certifications. Do we have the capacity to maintain? Will people be certified to maintain those buses on premise, and cost? So there'll be a lot that will go in. I love the idea, but there'll be a lot that goes into that. I just wanted to say that before I forgot, in response to what you were saying before. And then President Chimera, last comment for the board. Folks, just for tonight, I know that you've been hearing a lot in the news about what's going to happen with schools. I know it's a very hot topic. We'll continue just to keep you abreast, and I'm sure I'll have a better update. I hope I'll have a better update next week at the board meeting, but we'll continue to work not only as a cabinet and with our administrators, but with our teachers as new information comes out, okay? Right now, we recently sent a letter to families last Friday of our VLA families to ask them to please dedicate that they're either going to come back or stay in VLA for the rest of the year. I just want our public and for you to make sure that you're clear before next meeting why we did that. We're looking for, if nothing else changes, what else we can figure out on our teams with our teachers based on 6 feet. Can we offer more in-person instruction? So that's why we had that shift. We're getting to the point now at the end of the year. We're not quite into fourth quarter yet, but we're midway through third. By the time we'd be able to make any moves, we're already losing even more time. So that's why that went out. That's not in anticipation of 3 feet. If we hear anything, I know that everybody's read in the papers about 3 feet. We'll still have to look at all the implications on that. Okay, we'll have to bring our teachers together, understand what's going on the ground, boots on the ground, what the implications are in the model. I just want to remind our public, we came in, a lot of changes in school districts were made this year in order to have instructional models during a pandemic. When guidance changes, it's not just the flip of a switch. There are a lot of implications to then change, right? And to figure out what it does to the schedule, what it does to transportation. Are these changes universal? Is there something different for transportation than there is in the schools? When we have all the kids back in the schools, what does it do for, travel, all sorts of things. So we're looking at those now. We're continuing to talk and figure those things out, but just we'll keep our fingers crossed and keep our ears to the news as things change. But I just didn't want our board thinking that if some change came out tomorrow, or our public, that by Thursday we can just flip a switch. Okay, there'll still be a lot of work that needs to be done, and we'll do that work in collaboration like we always do in Kenton with all of our people that are our boots on the ground to figure out the best way for kids and families. So just real quick update before next week. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item 4, public comments. Do we have any public comments, I see? Karen, anything? Okay, how about any board comments? No? Okay, we don't have a need for an executive session. So do I have a Motion to adjourn? So moved by Tom. Second by Jen. Any discussion? Okay, there being none, I call for a vote. All those in favor, so signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passed unanimously, and we are adjourned.